Hello, I'm Andy Agathangelo. I'm very proud to be the founder of campaign group Transparency Task Force. We're an international organisation. We're UK based, but we have people looking into our work and getting involved in 20 countries around the world. And we started back in 2015 as a consequence of my firm belief that the financial sector is profoundly important to the well-being of society, to economic stability and political stability too. I am a fan of the financial sector, having worked in it for many years, but I'm acutely aware that if you give it a chance to misbehave, it will. And the checks and balances around that misbehavior really does rely on effective oversight, stewardship, governance, and regulation. When I kicked off the work of Transparency Task Force back in 2015, I was very much of the view that the regulatory framework was a big part of the solution. Today, I'm not so convinced. Today, I'm of the view that there's so much scope to improve the way the market is regulated that, to all intents and purposes, it is a part of the problem. Is it full of conflicts of interest? Is it susceptible to regulatory capture? And is it basically there to protect the system from the consumers rather than the other way around? I'll leave those questions hanging. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Lindsay Rogerson and Rachel Walcott. They run a fantastic organisation that, in all honesty, Transparency Task Force have quickly become fans of. We've known their work for quite some time in their previous lives at Thomson Reuters, where they were extremely credible professional journalists, investigative reporters, and so on. So let me give you a little tip about what to do when you next go to the compliance correlated website. I'm sharing my screen here, as you can see. What I've been paying particular attention to are sort of two sets of things, really. First of all, the articles. There's obviously lots of very interesting, informative articles covering all kinds of things connected to the topic of regulation, not just with a UK perspective, but with an international perspective too. The articles tend to be healthy, holistic, deep dives into topics. They're not obviously representing the perspective of one particular publication because they don't need to do that. They have their own platform here, and it's fantastic. So the articles are great. For me personally, if you click on see more, sorry, if you click on the search button and you put in the word podcasts, you get the bit that I particularly enjoy. If you search on podcasts, it'll take you to the routine, regular updates here. You can see the recent one, Trade Secret Enablers of the Illicit Trade in Polar Bears. Wow. Can carbon credits overcome the checkered past and save the planet? No sense of urgency in UK fraud response. Will BRIC card be the panacea for reducing fraud, etc., etc.? Some of them are relevant to our work. Some of them are so relevant to our work that's as if they were specially made for the TTF audience. And we are extremely grateful to Rachel and Lindsay for breaking out on their own, doing the brave thing of setting up their own platform and using their expertise, insights, and experience to bring the world of regulations to life in the way that they do. We're going to be hearing from Lindsay and Rachel shortly. They'll be talking about their work, the trends that they see that are happening out there. They'll be talking about things like the consumer duty, recent regulatory developments, and so on. We haven't constrained them in any way. We've simply said, Rachel, Lindsay, talk to us about what you think is important. Then following that, we'll have a Q&A and a discussion, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. I hope that sets the scene nicely, ladies. Can we, before we do anything else, can we please applaud our speakers for tonight, not just for being here this evening, but frankly, for doing work over many, many years to help expose things that needed to be exposed, write about things that needed to be written about, and never hesitating to talk truth to power in the way that they've done so successfully and so consistently over a long period of time. Rachel, Lindsay, we applaud your work. Thank you very much indeed for being here. We're big fans.
That's really sweet, Andy. Thank you.
We're big fans. Over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Rachel, do you want to go kick off?
Sure. Well, like Andy said, I'm Rachel and this is Lindsay. We worked together for a long time at Thomson Reuters, doing regulatory intelligence, covering UK financial service in Europe. I did a lot of, and I still do a lot of work on financial crime. And as you all know, the financial crime piece has a lot of overlap with the fraud piece, which is the fraud piece is just growing and growing, to be honest. So we can talk a little bit about that towards the end because, and I think it actually goes with the crypto piece that we were going to talk about a little bit. But anyway, like Andy said, a year ago we set up Compliance Correlated. We're very kindly backed by an Irish tech entrepreneur called John Byrne, who runs a company called Corylated, um, which is actually really interesting because one of their products is a uh, horizon scanning thing. So you can see a lot of data, and that data allows you to test ideas and test statements that different regulators are making. And also lets us keep really on top of everything that's going on in the UK financial services market in terms of regulation. For example, if the Financial Conduct Authority says that it's cracking down on, some one thing, or they're, doing a lot more market abuse, uh, prosecutions, we can test that by looking at the data, seeing what's actually happening. And I think that's really important. And I think that's one of the things that, I mean, obviously, I would say, I mean, it's our platform, so I would believe this, but I think it gives us a little more credibility because if we see that data is not backing up certain statements or it is backing it up, I think that's really important to share. Um, but yeah, it's been a super busy year because, and I think, Lindsay, it would be great if you could chime in. We've had the new Labor government for about 18 months, and they've kind of carried on this deregulatory agenda as part of the growth agenda. And I think it's becoming increasingly clear over the past year what that's going to mean for consumers and what it's going to mean for FCA activities. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today. But maybe Lindsay, maybe we can start talking about how the big consumer duty package that was trumpeted, from the rooftops as being, the biggest thing ever for consumer protection. And at the time, the FCA was really positioning itself as being all about consumer protection. That was its main thing that it was going to do. Um, ha-
Yes.
Maybe we can talk about how that's really, I feel like that's really quickly changed, Lindsay.
Um, I think it's still up in the air about whether and to the what extent it's going to be unpicked. Certainly, the fear is that it's going to be unpicked, and they are using the consumer duty. We just had another example today to strip away a lot of the rules in the rule book because they're going to rely on the consumer duty instead. But we haven't actually seen a lot of evidence about how the consumer duty is being policed yet. We've had reviews and there's like good and bad practice, but that's not um there's certainly no enforcement cases to rely on in seeing how that is going to work through. So I mean, I think and sorry, you will have seen that John Howard mentioned when we worked together on the consumer panel. Actually, John recruited me to the consumer panel. He was the chair at the time. And way back then, the big thing was treating customers fairly. And, we had that not really deliver what the promise was. And I do think the consumer duty, personally, I think the consumer duty has learned from what was put in place with the consumer duty, learned from the mistakes of treating customers fairly. But I'm not convinced yet that it is being enforced, by the regulator. It could just be that those cases haven't come through, or they're biding their time. There's always a bedding in period whenever a new regulation kicks in. But I am a little bit worried about the talk now about sort of easing back on the consumer duty that we see. Certainly, the I was at a FCA briefing ahead of the uh, the launch of the removal of the kid documents, and
Key
so
information
that's your key
document.
investment documents, the information that everybody gets when they buy an investment product. Now, do not get me wrong, there was a lot that was wrong with the information documents as they were, and that had been flagged for years. And people don't read them, people don't engage with them. So I'm supportive of efforts to try and get people to engage with the information that they are given about their investment products, because we all need to do that. We all need to not buy things blindly. And so so any work that can be done, and obviously using technologies that we have now to kind of aid understanding of what people are buying is all well and good. But alongside that they've rejigged the rules around what counts as a professional or sophisticated investor. And so I am supportive of the fact that they have upped the wealth limit on people. Other people might disagree, because some retail investors always think they should have access to more complex products, which are normally just for more, well, not more, but for people who have a lot of wealth, and so therefore can really take on more risk. And so that's gone from 500,000 to 10 million. And that's which is I think is a good thing. It's in line with certain other countries that have those limits. Ours has just never been raised. And also the FCA said it's making the bit where you can opt out and self-certify much more robust. So we'll have to wait and see if that actually happens, because as you know, Andy, and as many people on this call know, and as Rachel and I have reported over the years, it's far too easy to tick a box and get yourself certified and get access to products, which you probably shouldn't. They're very, contracts for difference are very binary products, are very complex products. And some of
And
the
risky.
evidence that the FCA had found was that, that the websites that were promoting these products to retail investors, where it's kind of like gamification, and that's not healthy, and that's not good, and it crosses very clearly over into gambling. So I'm gonna pause there. But so on the consumer duty, I think it's still. I'm worried that it's going to be eroded before it's actually had a time to bed in. But it is this big stick which the regulator is using to hold people to account. So we'll have to see. And actually, there's no, in things like where it makes firms test the consumer understanding of the products they have, where they have to track the complaints, where they have to assess the value that their products deliver. These are all really good things, and and these bits aren't being taken away. So I think we just need to give it a little bit more time.
Well, I feel like that's stuff that any decent bank should be doing anyway, in terms of, risk managing its business. I would just add to that one thing that I think this group might want to be particularly aware of is you I think that a lot of the firms in the UK are going to be wanting to get on board with the government's uh, aspiration to get more people investing their pensions in Britain, or investing their capital here. And I think one thing I would be really wary of in this group is, these AI solutions that might be coming, robo advice and things like that, because I don't think that's really been tested yet. I mean, it was when the Treasury Select Committee did a call for evidence on use of AI in financial services over the year, earlier in the year. AI powered investment tools, it was a big one of them, and not coincidentally, they have become so scammy. Um, we saw a real spike in warnings from the FCA's on firms that were purporting to offer some sort of AI investment tool. So I'd be really careful about that. And I think that'll be one to watch. And I think it's going to be difficult for the FCA to uh, to follow, especially since we've got crypto coming. But before we get, or it's already here, but before we get to that, I think it'd be nice to talk a little bit about enforcement. Lindsay said there we haven't seen a lot of enforcement action on consumer duty, and I just have a couple of observations here. One is like the FCA has been really actively reducing the number of enforcement investigations it has on foot. So I did some work on this in the summer, and I found that about 63% of cases that the FCA had open had been closed without further action. And this is all part of a strategy to whittle down open cases and focus on cases they think they can win. And Lindsay and I were both at a conference, I think in maybe September, or where Therese Chambers, who's the co-head of enforcement from the FCA, was saying they're not really in the market for any new cases. And I think I remember correctly, and Lindsay might want to correct me. I think Nikhil Rathi said that they're looking to get their cases closed without further action down to like, I don't know, I want to say like 10% or something like that, around that mark. So they're really going to be picking and choosing what they can go after and where they can get a win.
Yeah,
Um,
but if they so when this was originally muted, the idea was, those cases would be the big exemplars, which would, make other bring other people into line. So again, it's a kind of wait and see. I think there as well. I just want to jump back for a second, Rachel, because I forgot to mention something else, which we have a young reporter with us this week from journalism school, and he attended an FCA briefing this morning on their firm track checker tool, which hopefully some people on this call are familiar with. So this is the consumer facing, so they're kind of ramping it up again tomorrow to highlight. It's been beta testing for a while, and so tomorrow is its official launch. And so we all know how unuser friendly the register was. We've been flagging it for years. Everybody's been flagging it. It doesn't necessarily always highlight the information that retail investors need when they're checking out a firm. And so Firm Checker is a little bit different. So it does pull through the register information on a firm, but it's kind of color coded in a much more kind of user friendly way. I think personally, I've been playing around with it for a couple of months now in the beta stage. And then, but it has this extra layer, which I do think shows that maybe the FCA is learning from past mistakes. And so you also say like what service you're looking for from that firm. And so it will match not only the firm's details, but the permissions. So the permissions bit, so it will flag if it doesn't actually have the permission. So if we go back to London Capital and Finance and, LCNF and Dame Elizabeth Gloucester's terming of the halo effect, so that was a license used to sell other, non-regulated products. So this will hopefully help that be flagged in the future, so people will know that the firm only has permissions to do certain things, and if it's trying to do something else, then maybe it's to steer clear. I mean, obviously, the big thing behind this is the big caveat or unanswered question in this space is how much promotion the FCA is going to put and resources going to put behind getting everybody out there to know that this is where you go to check if a firm is valid. And then obviously the flip side of that is, as we know, we all know the register is not always as accurate as it should be.
Or clear. I mean, you've got to
Yeah,
know some lingo, like, oh,
yeah,
it's a MiFID firm. Like, people won't know what that is, or like, what is
yeah.
it licensed for? Like, a lot of it is like, you need to have a certain level of knowledge to have that be useful to you. We were looking at the firm checker today. I felt like the interface was like a little more user friendly, but the information that you got was basically the same. So not that great. And just to scroll back to the enforcement action piece, I think, well, like a couple of observations that the FCA definitely hasn't been that nimble in terms of um, taking on a piece of work and kind of getting it done in a time and getting it done in a timely fashion. I think we can see most recently motor finance being an example of that. I'm 100% sure that's taking up a huge amount of time at the Financial Conduct Authority. I can think of some other long-term pieces of work, for example, on the pension advice around the British Steel Pension Fund. That took them a really long time to get through. And there was another one more, it'll come back to me, but these pieces of work seem to take them forever. And one of my fears is that when we're doing less enforcement, public enforcement, that there's going to be more use of less transparent um, tools in the regulatory toolbox. So Section 166 reviews, maybe they'll um, advise a company to pay consumers redress, and you won't necessarily know anything about it unless the firm contacts you. Because as Lindsay and I have reported in the past, you redress schemes
The FCA doesn't
are
keep a list
yeah,
of all of these voluntary redress schemes that it goes and that it firms do, sort of behind the scenes. I mean, I came across one which prompted Rachel and I to go on down this rabbit hole. I don't know, 6 years
God,
ago maybe. It was somebody got a letter from their pension. Somebody I know got a letter from a pensions company saying, "Oh, we're giving you £2,000." And they were like, "What? What's this? Why are they giving me £2,000?" And when you look into it, it's because they've been overcharging them for a decade. But that wasn't really, certainly was not explained up front. And then when I looked into
exactly.
it, that counted as, the FCA doesn't have that scheme isn't recorded anywhere within the FCA. There's no list of all of these schemes that go out there, so we just don't really have
I
a
think it's to
clear
keep
idea
the
on
claim.
that.
Yeah, I think it's to keep the claims management people at bay. They're really paranoid about that. And I think that was from the missteps from the PPI mis-selling scandal. And I think that's probably what's been making them progress so gingerly with, well, I don't know. It's funny with the motor finance situation. I mean, they came out all guns blazing and then kind of backed off.
There does seem to be a bit of a pattern there. Sometimes the regulator comes out with what looks like very positive, very
Yeah.
robust new initiatives, and then over a period of time, it's as if they get chipped away at by the industry lobbying. Ladies, I have a suggestion. Wayne Stevens is going to be departing in
Oh,
about
okay.
in about 10
Yeah.
minutes or so. So here's my suggestion. I'm going to talk about the consequences of regulatory failure for just a couple of minutes. I'll then invite Wayne to talk about the work that his organisation, Victim Support, has been doing in that space. Then after Wayne's jumped off, we'll go back to yourselves to count where you've got to,
Yeah.
if that's okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure.
Perfect.
It's all very, very interesting indeed. So we can look at the topic of regulation in many, many different ways. And in some ways, one of the sensible ways of looking at it is in the context of what happens when it goes horribly wrong. Now, of course, there's a huge amount of financial crime going on, and that huge amount of financial crime going on is being caused by many, many different things. Very often, the regulator has nothing to do with it whatsoever. In other words, there is no aspect of regulatory failure whatsoever. But sometimes it's quite clear that that's not the case. In other words, there has been some degree of regulatory failure. I'm thinking of cases like London Capital Finance, Woodford, Connaught. There's a long list. This document that I'm sharing on my screen, we called it Faces of Financial Crime, was put together by TTF, in particular put together by some interns working for us and with us for a period of time. And what we wanted to do was to actually catalogue in a reasonably scientific way, in a very evidence-based way, what actually happens to people who become victims of financial conduct or mis-selling, malfeasance, outright crime. We organised them into different sections. There's a bit about bank scandals here. There's fake insolvency. One of the new groups TTF's going to be getting up and running next year is about the weaponization of insolvency. It's a remarkably problematic area. Fraudulent investment schemes, mortgage prisoners, poor financial advice, pension scams, obviously loads and loads and loads of those, and so on and so forth. I'll put a link to this document in the chat. It's available free. And you'll see here that we dedicated it to the 10,000 plus people who took their own lives as a consequence of financial crime and malpractice, malfeasance, misconduct, mis-selling by the financial services sector. That figure of 10,000 hyperlinks to research by Oxford University talking about the consequences of the great financial crash, the global financial crash, nothing great about it at all. The global financial crash where people lost their jobs, lost their livelihoods, lost their will to live, and as a consequence, quite simply, took their lives. I also put in the chat a link to the early day motion of Ian Davis. Many of you will know the Ian Davis story. He was one of Transparency Task Force's volunteers. We knew his case very well because he was one of the 173 people who came forward to give evidence to the all-party parliamentary group on investment fraud and fair financial services, work on the FCA. And what this early day motion text basically says is he lost the will to live, having become a victim of financial crime. He was one of the London Capital Finance victims. He lost all of his money just as he was approaching retirement. We don't think it was losing the money that caused Ian to decide to take his own life. It was the immense and extreme frustration he had, frankly, going around in circles trying to get the authorities to take him seriously as he was bit by bit uncovering the fraud that was taking place. A lovely guy, we miss him, and we've often remarked about Ian at events that we've run. So just to recap, my point is very simply this. Regulation is very, very difficult. Sometimes it's done well. Sometimes it seems it's been done badly. When it is done badly, there are real world consequences to it. It really does smash people's lives. I could talk about that for ages, but I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is invite Wayne Stevens to talk about his work on the fraud and financial crime space at Victim Support and talk about the recent work Victim Support have been doing to try to, as we've been doing over years, draw attention to the problem of the lack of support for victims of financial crime. Then, as I said later, we'll jump back to Lindsay and Rachel to carry on from where they got to. Thank you, Victim. Thank you, Victim Support Lead Fraud Man. Wayne Stevens, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Good evening, everyone. My name is Wayne Stevens. I'm the fraud lead at Victim Support, which is a charity in England and Wales. We provide free, confidential, and impartial support for people who experience fraud and other crime types as well. Andy picked up on a radio story I did on Money Bucks Live a couple of weekends ago. The BBC have been running a scams week. I'm sure many of you will have picked up on that, and we spoke out because well, many victims tell us that they feel let down by the criminal justice system when they experience fraud, and also, of course, they feel let down by their banks and utilities companies. We supported something a little over 7,400 victims of fraud last year, and our activity is in the fraud space rather than the sort of financial compliance space. But as Rachel was saying earlier on, there's a Venn diagram and there's a big overlap in the middle. In the same way that it feels like the financial services environment is undergoing some deregulating, then we're also seeing some squeeze on public services, particularly those for people affected by crime. The Ministry of Justice announced last year that they were reducing funding going into victim services. So we've been speaking out very strongly for that, because we know that there are probably 3 to 4 million fraud incidents last year, according to the Office for National Statistics. And behind each one of those incidents, there's someone who's experienced a fraud. And that number's grown over the last couple of years. So it's huge, and it's a growing problem. And there's very little support out there for people who experience fraud. So we've been trying to make a case that there should be funding going into independent services. We also think that the new fraud strategy that the government are working on at the moment should commit to a far-reaching public awareness campaign. Lots of people aren't aware that they are more at risk of fraud than any other crime. We aren't very well equipped to identify potential fraud or even necessarily know what to do about it. It's not something that's a very attractive conversation from the financial services industry, but it should be. We think the financial services industry should be designing out fraud at the outset so that bad actors don't even get into the payment systems. We try to promote our own services so that people who experience fraud and some of the devastating consequences of that can come forward and get some independent information and advice from us about how they can rebuild their lives. Because as Andy said, it's a hugely prevalent problem, and for some people it has absolutely devastating consequences.
Wayne, thank you very much indeed for chipping into the conversation. We know you need to get going shortly. Folks, can we show our appreciation not just to Wayne, but all his colleagues at Victim Support, because they are able to help and make a huge difference sometimes. And given the fact that they're a proper establishment organisation who are doing a great job highlighting the plight of financial crime victims and others, they're absolutely on side, and we salute the work you do, Wayne. Thank you very much indeed. Super stuff.
Thanks, Andy. If I could just pose one question to Rachel, really, I'd be quite interested on your view about the changes that are likely to take place around the financial services financial ombudsman service. There was something about that in the Mansion House speech earlier on in the year, and we've got some concerns about the linkages between the FOS and the FCA. I was wondering if you had a view on it.
That's really Lindsay is the FOS expert, but I also have some comments about fraud more generally, because we both heard Lord Hanson, the fraud minister, speak. So we in the last couple of weeks. But Lindsay, yeah, talk about the FOS.
I share your concern, because we don't know yet, and obviously in terms of compensation, what the government did with the interest payment will reduce the payouts that people receive. when they have been, when they're a victim, I guess, of, or where there has been an issue with their financial provider, that's there. I mean, I don't know. I have issues myself over the years with the way FOS has handled cases that I've looked into. I do think that their data set in mapping the complaints that are coming through and spotting trends and everything, I think that is very helpful. They do a lot of that work. I have said to FOS myself that I think it could be maybe presented in a more user-friendly way so people can identify more readily if in that 6-month data set. I think it's a 6-month data set where you can look to see how many cases a particular provider has had against them and the uphold rate. But that is not an easy data set. I spent 2 days with the team at FOS trying to get understand all of the columns that are in that data set. And there's no way a member of I'm not seeking to patronize members of the public, but there's no way that you can understand what all those columns mean the way they are currently presented. And and so
difficult.
That needs a lot. FOS needs to work on the information it presents to the public as well. I think. Those are my thoughts, really.
Can I chip in on the FOS front? We've got John Howard with us tonight. Mr. John Howard, if you want to chip into the conversation about FOS, please do so. The way TTF sees it is that the FOS did have a really good blueprint. They were able, as I understand it, to make decisions based upon individual cases. I think the phrase was fair and reasonable. As long as it was fair and reasonable, they could decide whatever they wanted to decide. It seems now, based upon recent consultations, that the system, I'll call it the system is trying to change the remit that FOS works to, whereby if there's a difference between what the FCA does and what the FOS does, the FOS can basically only really kind of adjudicate if the company has done something wrong as far as the FCA rulebook is concerned. And that's effectively a tightening of its remit. We're really concerned, Lindsay and Rachel, that it's going to mean that the FOS is less effective than it previously was. I've seen Paul Cardi has put his hand up. We'll ask Paul to briefly, I'm focusing on the word briefly, Paul. I'm asking Paul to focus briefly on his comments about FOS. And then if Mr. John Howard wants to chip into this conversation, because I know he's got some very evolved views about this FOS issue, well, let's do that, and then we'll bounce back to Lindsay and Rachel. Yeah, Paul, thank you. Please do share your thoughts, Paul. Cheers.
Yeah, the FOS, I mean, a lot has been made. I mean, the UK Finance produced they published a paper that they presented to Treasury and Rachel Reeves, head of the Mansion House speech, and the UK Finance used a term in that they then used to persuade HM Treasury and Rachel Reeves to water down the FOS powers. They claimed that the FOS was acting as a quasi-regulator and were referring to the FOS upholding the complaints against Black Horse and Barclays in car finance, specifically to incentivise commission arrangements. Now, I know that wasn't the case. The FCA knows that wasn't the case, yet the FCA didn't correct UK Finance and allowed UK Finance to use that argument as leverage to diminish the powers of the FOS even further than they already are. The FOS were encouraged, directed, or told by the FCA to uphold those two complaints because they were about to be exposed. Their findings their dishonestly limited findings in 2019 were about to be exposed by a class action that lawyers filed based on the evidence that I gave them. I've also got two FOS senior managers, one from July 2019 and one from April this year, both of whom said that in 2016 and in 2019, the FCA told them to deny all complaints specific to incentivised commission arrangements on car finance. I've got them on the record. They said that the FCA is our authority. We have to do as we're told. And in those cases, they were directing, the FCA wanted us to deny complaints, so we did. And they engineered a system whereby we all had to go through the motions from 2019 onwards, where we all had an adjudicator look at our cases under what we believed was them assessing each case on its individual merits and evidence. And the decision was free from any interference from management or anybody else, and their decision would be binding. However, this was not the case because a red flag had been put in place. And that red flag, according to both of these senior managers, was referring to a predetermined outcome established by the FCA and that the FOS was expected to follow. And in car finance from 2019, deny everything. And that involved when the adjudicator on my family member's, second family member's complaint was escalated to them, the FOS in 2018. Internal records I've now got show that on the 28th of February 2019, days before the FCA's dishonesty limited final notice on their 2-year investigation, the adjudicator upheld my family member's complaint and agreed with me that the incentivised commission arrangement was unfair and unlawful and the firm had to remedy. However, internal emails I've now got reveal that her decision was captured by a red flag and diverted to a senior stakeholder group within the FOS. And I'm going to name names here so that it's on the recording, on the record. Simon Rule, Lee Betts, Mark Hollins were 3 of these senior FOS managers who reported directly to then CEO Caroline Wayman. They confirmed this red flag existed, confirmed that they'd intercepted my family member's complaint, and both confirmed that over multiple occasions over the next few weeks had spoken with the adjudicator and with their manager and intimidated and encouraged them to reverse their decision, which this relatively junior adjudicator, obviously being intimidated by senior managers, bowed to that direction and denied that complaint. Now, red flag.
Paul, thank you. Forgive me. We'll wrap it up there. But if I can just kind of summarise my understanding of your take on the whole thing, Paul, and we'll come back to you later, Paul, after we finish this FOS bit. You've got so much rich content to share with us. What Paul thinks, and frankly what I think, and what a lot of people in TCF think, is that the proposed reforms to the FOS are potentially dangerous because they are part of what seems like a deregulatory agenda that seems like it's part of this regulate for growth agenda. And there are, and I'm happy to make this statement as well, there is hard evidence suggesting that the relationship between the FCA and the FOS is nothing like as independent as it's supposed to be and needs to be for the FOS to be able to function correctly. Paul, thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to you later, Paul. Let's grab Mr. John Howard while he's here. Folks, if you don't know John, please do take a look at the link I put in the chat. TTF is very, very proud to have Mr. Consumer as the chair of our advisory group. John, over to you. Thank you very much.
Very, very proud to be part of it, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. I must say that I'm rather in sympathy with a lot of the worries that has already been expressed about what they're doing with the FOS. I've always been of the view that the FOS has been one of the most important developments that we've had in financial services on behalf of the consumer. In 2000, when the FOS was created, there were about 20,000 complaints to the FOS. There are now 250,000 a year complaints to the FOS. And the basis upon which you can go and make a complaint is that you feel upset about it, you feel it's unfair, and it's cheap. Well, it's nothing to those who make the complaint, and an easy system. And that's what it was supposed to be. It didn't set precedent. One case didn't rule all the others. And it meant that you were able to go and get a decision upon whether what you were complaining about and that what you were after was fair and reasonable in all the circumstances of the case. And that is one of the few areas in law where fairness is actually ruling the roost, and not something called justice, which is even more obscure. The problem for the industry was that fair is very difficult to define. I've had a go at defining it in a book I wrote some little while ago. It is difficult to define, but the industry took it all far too seriously and thought if they lost one case in the FOS, because of the particular circumstances of that case, then they were going to be really roundly berated in the press and that they were going to lose credibility. And they wanted to undermine what the FOS was able to do from, well, really from the start, in my impression. What we really need to worry about, I think, is the fact the FOS can make this decision, what's fair and reasonable in all the circumstances of the case. What is being proposed is that they have that final say taken away from them, and it goes back to the regulator. And the regulator won't make a decision on fairness, it will make a decision on whether it meets the rules, which is something very, very different. You cannot produce a rule which covers every circumstance, which is why fairness is much more important, because you can take account of things like the age of a person, their capacity to make a decision, whereas the rules do not take that into account at all. So I think this is a really important undermining of the Financial Ombudsman Service's remit, and that's why I wrote an article a little while ago about this, explaining why I felt it was so important that we tried to stop it. But it's gone through now, so we must just continue, I think, to try and press that this is reinstated, that the financial ombudsman can make a decision on the basis of fairness. And really, that's what every consumer takes into account. We know when something's fair or whether it's unfair in our own minds. Some mysterious reason, people in financial services firms find that very difficult. Well, I'd much prefer to have consumers deciding what was fair and reasonable in all the circumstances and making a complaint, even if later on an ombudsman or one of the adjudicators doesn't think they've quite made the case. It's a much more important opportunity for consumers to go to the financial ombudsman services. They don't always make the right decision. No organization does. And I better come clean now. I was on the board of the Financial Ombudsman Service, and I myself saw things where I felt they hadn't quite made the right decision. But in the majority of cases, the 250,000 a year, I think they did make the right decision, and it was a better outcome than leaving the FCA to decide on the basis of what the rule said, which cannot cover every circumstance. There you are, Andy. That's me sounding off again.
Well, I think that's a really great point to talk about just a little bit about motor finance, because I think the motor finance situation is a really good example of how something went to the FOS, it got challenged by the banks. The Financial Conduct Authority seemed to be on board with um, s- this idea of fairness and what you could rightfully expect when you were going in to obtain car financing. But then it got down into this really legalistic, long drawn out argument about like all different kinds of things. And I don't think it was fair for the consumer. It came down on this really legal, these legalistic points. And I understand that people will still be getting some money back and that it will cost the motor finance providers some money. But
The FOS decision, sorry, Rachel, the FOS decision has never actually been
overturned.
no, sorry, there's two FOS decisions here. So one of the one of the chief executives who has been most vocal in saying the FOS was out of control, out of hand, is Charlie Nunn at Lloyd's. Lloyd's has never challenged the FOS decision which went against it. It has never challenged it. It was
Barclays.
it was effectively Clydesdale that challenged their FOS decision, and then they dropped that after the Supreme Court case went through on the CCJ cases that went through. But Lloyd's, who has been, they've been at Treasury Select Committee hearings where they've said, he said, it's damaging Britain's reputation in the world, but that bank has never challenged that decision. and when I ask them about it, they just don't reply anymore. I used to ask them about it every time Charlie Nunn made a statement, were they going to challenge it, and they just stopped replying. So to John's point, the FOS made a decision. That decision stands, but because the rules have been tinkered with since then, people are actually going to get less of a payout than they would have done had their cases gone through 18 months ago, or 2 years ago, as it is now. It was January 2024 when this was first paused. So yeah.
I just thought that when we were looking at this together, I felt like it had come. I think my broader point is that it had strayed from this broader fairness point that John was speaking to into a more kind of legalistic and like I thought like in parts kind of like confusing and contradictory kind of arguments from the FCA. I thought it would just. I think it's obviously just simpler if you have the capacity to kind of look at these cases in the whole, like John was suggesting. I think it will be a shame to see that go away, but I like people have been saying the banks, they I don't know on what grounds they don't think they can be held accountable, because their customer service and communications is appalling. When you have an issue on any type of thing, even trying to ring up about, basic banking um, services, it's incredibly difficult. Being able to do some what you would think is kind of basic transactions are like completely onerous, and now there are no bank branches, so even if there is, you can't even go in and talk to anybody. It's a nightmare. Um, so
Shall
I've
we?
never, I know this is kind of off piece, but I just feel like communications, it kind of goes back to this point about the key investor documents, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. Banks' ability to communicate well and sympathetically with their customers, I think has been a long-term problem. And I think it's a pretty simple thing where they just need to train people a lot better to understand who they're dealing with and what the products they're selling. I mean, it's not rocket science.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say, all I was going to say was, that there, on the point of communication, sometimes even finding a number to communicate with the financial services institution is really difficult. And,
So bad.
In Europe, they so it came in, I think, after the line came down when we weren't adopting any more European legislation. So you have to not just offer somebody a chatbot to communicate, you actually have to give them a physical number to call. I mean, there's an argument whether you get through on the line, that's a separate thing. But I mean, I spent, I don't know, the best part of a week trying to track down the number for a UK financial institution, maybe about 6 weeks ago. I eventually,
this is a nightmare.
So it was one entity owned by another UK entity. Neither of those had any kind of public facing number. You went to the chatbot, you never got anyone to call you back. There was no press function, so you couldn't even go as a journalist, which is why I was trying the normal way. I eventually worked out that this company was owned by Societe Generale. Contacted Societe Generale. I'm still waiting to hear back. So it's not, and that's a journalist who manages to work her way around the system. It's not, it should be that everyone has to have numbers. I mean, you'll remember, well, I'm old enough to remember when there was a big to do about, companies charging you for calling their customer services line, but now the numbers just don't even seem to be public anymore. Very few, and that shouldn't be, I think, that's something that the regulator should be taking action on, because you should be able to communicate with your bank in a way that you choose to, not with a chatbot.
Exactly. And I think, it's something that actually was part of Consumer Duty in the beginning, which was they were getting kind of de-sludgifying um, consumer consumer finance and banking, that that's what it's called when you cannot find a number on a website where your ability to interact with your financial institution in a meaningful way, or you're getting bounced around or put on hold. It's called sludging. Or the poor complaints process. It's called sludging, and it's called to discourage you to give up, and you go away and leave them alone.
Which you just reminded me, Rachel, as you know, when we were still at Thomson Reuters, when the Consumer Duty was coming in, I interviewed a senior person at the FCA about sludge and how they're getting rid of sludge. I have been asking for 4 months now for the FCA to basically redo that interview, and it just gets parked. And sludge was a key part of Consumer Duty when it launched, and and they had a report out in the summer, which is what prompted me to revisit this, done by their behavioral science team. It was a good report about sludge practices, but coming back to the reason I was trying to get hold of Societe Generale, there was a clear sludge practice involved that I was investigating. And that was, so again, I wanted to talk about sludge and what they were doing about sludge, and, getting nowhere, which
this is fascinating.
It's not great.
This is fascinating. Ladies, if I may, I'd like to take the conversation to conflicts of interest, and just to sort of set the scene for this, I'm going to share my screen. Now, my understanding is that when the global financial crisis happened, 3 organizations were created around the world that had a specific and sole purpose to protect consumer interests. In the US, there was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is what's on my screen now. It was state funded, and it's all about protecting the consumer interests. Those of you who are interested in developments in the USA will know that this particular organization is somewhat under threat at the moment, for reasons we won't go into today because it's not directly relevant to our conversation. So that's what the US did. Global financial crisis happened. Part of the response to it was, we need an organization that's going to speak up for consumers with no other remit, a focused job, consumer protection. In Canada, they produce Fair Canada, same kind of thing, as it says, advocating for investor fairness, helping you understand your rights. So again, the same kind of thing as the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And in my face there was an event there today I spoke at. In Europe, they had Better Finance, again, funded by the state. I think it's now 50% funded by the state and 50% by other sources of income. But Better Finance's purpose is exclusively consumer protection. If you compare that with what we've got with the FCA, Lindsay and Rachel, I would argue that the FCA has got competing interests, perhaps even conflicted interests. On one hand, it's supposed to do, quote unquote, an appropriate degree of consumer protection. On the other hand, it's almost has a role of becoming a cheerleader for the city. It has this competitiveness and growth agenda. And it's also got to make sure that it doesn't do things that might upset prudential regulation. The classic scenario there is, what would the FCA do if a bank behaves so badly that the right response from a kind of moral point of view or justice point of view was to fine it £1 gazillion? But what if that £1 gazillion meant the bank was no longer financially stable? That's the conflict of interest between prudential regulation and conduct regulation. What would it do? And some would argue that that's basically what happened when the crash happened. So, Lindsay and Rachel, what are your thoughts about whether the UK's conduct regulation is fundamentally conflicted? Is there a better way? Lindsay, let's go to you first and to Rachel. Thank you.
I don't know, and I should declare that I was a member of the consumer panel at the FSA as it
Right.
was morphing into the cons FCA, and
Yeah.
actually there was a lot of debate at the time about whether consumer it should be the Financial Consumer Authority, and then it went with conduct, and and it had, and it was given this remit. In theory, they shouldn't be conflicting because a fair, a clean market encourages, is good for consumers, encourages consumers. I think we're in a situation now where, with all of the deregulation and with what's happening with, as we've just discussed, what's happening with FOS, etc., there is a risk, and this has been pointed out. I remember attending Treasury Select Committee hearing where there were various consumer reps there, and they were underscoring the point that if you take away trust in financial services markets for consumers, then consumers won't engage in the markets.
Yeah.
It's not good for markets. So there is it's a secular thing here. Um, I, I don't know. I think there are a lot of good people. Maybe controversial statement for this audience. I think there are a lot of good people working hard at the FCA to deliver for consumers,
Yeah. I
but
agree.
I think the FCA does not handle criticism well, and when things go wrong, it has a history, and its predecessor organization had a history of, I don't know, not taking accountability
Yeah.
for its mistakes. And so I'm not sure that's an answer to the question that you asked me, Andy. I mean, is it fundamentally conflicted? I mean, I guess if you look at what's happening in this to the to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau in the States, where it can just suddenly have all its resource taken away, that's not going to happen to the FCA, because it's set up in a different way. So I guess that's something, consumer protection can't just be ripped out. Um, but yeah, it's a difficult one. Rachel, jump in.
I think people, so the compliance and financial crime folks that we speak to all the time really see this conflict between the growth agenda and doing and compliance and financial crime, that they feel that they are being undermined somewhat, or that some of the policies that come out of government are undermining um, their ability to kind of keep the show on the road in a good way. Um, Also, this deregulatory narrative is also kind of making people feel uncertain in their jobs and not heard. A lot of, especially financial crime folks, don't believe that they are have enough clout still in organizations. And like I said, this, the growth agenda has not been great for a lot of the compliance community. Um, I've got a couple of other observations. You know, just in terms of financial crime compliance, so that under poor AML systems and controls like client onboarding and client risk assessment. I know this sounds a little boring, but it really does expose the UK consumer to a lot of crime and financial crime and fraud. So, um, for example, with APP fraud, we've got this 50/50 reimbursement scheme in place, but that is because a lot of these UK payment service providers were processing these authorized push payment fraud at scale, and they've had to do a lot of work. I would say only a tiny corner of, especially the smaller payment firms and EMIs, have really been held to task and held accountable for their role in some of these frauds. And I was just looking up one today that I've had my eye on in a while, and they were trumpeting, they tend to go with high risk uh, providers or banking as a service uh, platforms, which aren't always they don't always know who their customers are. And one of the things that we've been reporting on recently is even Visa and MasterCard, they have these merchant acquirer arrangements with UK payment firms or any payment firm around the world. So, your fraudsters are setting up as a payment customer and using UK payment systems to move the money around that they just stole from you, and making money off of it. It's terrible. So I feel like the FCA needs to do a lot more work clamping down and, like, frankly, just shutting down some of these e e-money and payment firms, because I mean, not only are they jeopardizing UK consumers and exposing them to fraud, but they're also enabling all kinds of other terrible things. Kleptocracy, money laundering, all not nice things. Um,
Yeah, I think this is where it crosses over with the growth agenda,
yeah, they're
so
not
like,
shutting them down because growth.
yeah, we're the UK is supposed to be attracting all of these companies, but you need to look at what the companies are. You have to make some kind of assessment. It's not just, oh, look, we've got 1,000 payment firms. Isn't the UK wonderful? That if they're all, or if a high percentage of them are, you know, actually where the fraudsters bank. I mean, the FCA,
Yeah,
sorry, the payment systems
exactly.
regulator used to do this great piece of research. They did it for a couple of years, and then once it announced, it basically disappeared this summer around, although I've been told it will emerge again. But they had
But
this data set
it's like
where,
naming and shaming.
yeah, where you could see the where the money was going. So you could see the payment firms that were receiving so that was obviously where the fraudsters were banking. And it was a really useful data set. And to be fair, the FCA has shut down, as we've been reporting, has been shutting down payments firms, but
Not
often only
everyone.
after people have got their money stuck in there. And we're also sort of seeing, Rachel can speak more to this than me, but this kind of merging now of payments and EMI firms with crypto
Crypto.
offerings. Again, crypto, we want to be a great big home to crypto without fully thinking through, that and I'm not saying for a second that all crypto is fraudulent, but there is
But
fraud in
most of it
crypto.
is.
Yeah.
I'll
So
say it.
okay.
I, I'll say it. Just on that point, just to go back to the crypto with the FOS. Now, here's a funny thing, where let's say you are the victim of a crypto scam and someone's like, here, pay me through this payment provider or through this bank. And, then I'm going to put your money into a crypto investment. So I've seen instances where the FOS has rejected somebody's claim for being defrauded on APP fraud because, and this is really difficult logic for me to understand. Maybe John can tell me about it, but basically, because even though you were never going to get crypto, because you thought you were getting crypto, it wasn't really like a payment. It's just like you use the payment for service. You hadn't done proper vetting they've onboarded a criminal. You get ripped off. The payment is executed to the criminal. you think or it goes on into a criminal's wallet on a crypto exchange, you're out of luck. You're getting nothing
Mm, mm.
because even though you never got crypto, there was actually might have never been a crypto aspect to this thing involved because it's just
Because
you're just
yeah,
out of luck. And I feel like,
yeah.
these are I feel like that's a weakness and an unfairness in the system. But I feel like um especially with these new, I mean, you're never going to get a crypto uh if you get ripped off in crypto, you're never going to get anything back from the falls. And I think it's going to be really difficult
The,
for people because people already are getting ripped off left, right, and center. You do not see a lot of law enforcement, SFO, NCA, or FCA activity clamping down on these crypto scammers. You see indictments and prosecutions for this every other day in the United States. We should be really having a much more robust response to that here because people are left holding the bag, and it is appalling that British financial services firms are enabling this at little cost to them, in my opinion.
the irony, or one of the ironies about crypto is that many people who are fans of crypto are fans because they completely distrust the established financial system, and they therefore feel unwilling to use the established financial system for investments and payments and stuff. And they've kind of developed the thought that crypto is somehow more transparent, fairer, modern, and they're putting their heads in the jaws of the lion in some cases, obviously.
Yeah,
Lindsay and Rachel,
absolutely.
it's been brilliant so far already.
Can I?
We're going to go to Paul Carlier for maximum 5 minutes, Paul. Okay, max 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'll put a timer on. Then we're going
Oh,
to go to Martin White. He's got some thoughts to share. Then we're going to go
okay.
back to Lindsay and
I'm
Rachel
gonna
for their final thoughts. Okay, thanks,
Sure.
ladies.
I'm gonna literally have to rush through this because I've got to get something. But on
Cool.
crypto, the irony is crypto only took off because HSBC's money laundering operation was shut down and the money needed somewhere to go. So obviously crypto, I love blockchain. I love the technology and everything behind it. It's fantastic. But crypto, everyone wants part of crypto now, and it only exists and it's only as popular as because of the all the drug money needed somewhere to be laundered. And crypto enabled it because of the anonymity that was involved. So
And other stuff.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just extraordinary that they've allowed.
It is a crime wave. Like
It is.
this is like one of my big takeaways. Sorry to interrupt, Paul, of 2025 is that 2025 has been the year of crime. And I don't know if it's just kind of coming to the surface, but I truly believe that a lot of it is enabled by crypto.
Yeah. Oh, it is. I mean, and I couldn't believe that they allowed 30 to 40 years of anti-money laundering legislation that had been like inch by inch they got this passed and improved and everything else to be just totally undone by
Yeah.
crypto. But we all know that the occupier of the White House, for example, is making a hell of a lot of money as a result of crypto, and everyone ignores one of the first executive orders he passed in January that to ban the Federal Reserve from developing, or any US agency from developing, an official crypto or digital currency. Right? I mean, no one picked that up, and it's there. If you look it up, and obviously then what happens within weeks, he's launching his own. I mean, you couldn't make that stuff up. So obviously people in the highest offices
Well, he
are
did it
profiting.
before he launched his meme coin before he went into office, Paul.
Yeah.
So
And then issued the executive order
yeah,
when he once he gets there. You know, it's extraordinary because that's what would happen. You know, and everyone was developing an official digital coin or crypto, and obviously the moment that happens, it should happen, but it's probably not going to now because of the amount of investor money that is out there. They don't know the consequences because obviously if you launch an official one, you immediately destroy and you introduce proper money laundering regs on existing Bitcoin and all the other coins out there. they become worthless almost overnight. And now they're so worried, like the Lehman's decision, they didn't realize the true extent of the consequences of it. Now nobody can default, because they just literally don't know. And it's in the case of Bitcoin, they can't shut it down, or they can't introduce, because they don't know how much money is exposed to it, how much retail money, how much ordinary people's money is out there in crypto, and obviously the consequences that would have. So they're now forced to embrace it. Anyway, that's one of the points I wanted to make. I'm going to just rattle through a couple, Andy. Charlie Nunn, as Lindsay said, been very vocal about car finance, and Robin Budenberg at this year's AGM, and I asked if they're going to claw back bankers' bonuses that were in some part related to the unlawful revenues. He said they wouldn't be clawing them back because they didn't believe it was unlawful at the time. They thought they were acting lawfully. Really? And Charlie Nunn made the same point to the Treasury Select Committee, right? Really? Two things there then. Then why did Black Horse, according to Charlie Nunn, stop using the incentivised commission arrangements in 2017, the year after I made such a fuss over it and being unlawful? Well, they took the decision to stop something they believed was to be unlawful years before the FCA clamped down. No, they knew it was wrong. Equally, why did Black Horse literally lie to me in response to two separate complaints 2 years apart, denying these incentivised commission arrangements even existed? If they thought them to be unlawful, why were they denying their existence? I'm raising that with the FCA as part of my submission to the consultation. But the broader issue tonight, obviously the relaxing of these investments, go to any platform, IG Index, for example. I just went there to check before the session started tonight. They have a disclaimer. All these platforms have a disclaimer at the top saying how the percentage of customers on their platform lose money. Currently today, 67% of retail investors lose money, or investors lose money who've got accounts with IG Index. Now, that's on CFDs and the sort of more volatile and perhaps leverage things. But if 67% of people that presumably are relatively experienced investors are losing money, what chance do investors with no experience, who are obviously now going to be free to or encouraged to invest, what chance have they got? I mean, I spent 28 years as a trader. I generated over 100 million in profits for the banks I work for. And yet, I mean, I keep my personal risk to an absolute minimum. The markets are not what you think they are. If you want to trade them, you need information, you need training, right? And you need to be able to devote a significant amount of time to it. Even if you're a part-time investor, you've still got to do your homework. You've still got to, and as been mentioned tonight, there are so many bots and there's so many people out there advertising. Even Mark Woodford is out there now. Sign up, follow me. This is the guy who cost how many investors billions, over the last few years, and so you are literally creating a wave of cash that's going to come from unsophisticated people and everybody thinks they will know and understand, and everyone who does their homework, like those who did their homework before they invested in Blackmore bond, right? Guaranteed by one of the world's largest banks. Oh, there's an insurance product that's been brokered by an FCA authorized and regulated firm. They did their homework, invested, only to find they didn't have protection. Now, one thing that the FCA is going to bang on about is going to be new rules, consumer duty, and everything else. New rules, new laws, relaxing of codes, light touch regulation. None of it matters if the FCA is going to cherry pick when to regulate and enforce, or when to create or engineer cracks to allow things to fall through. Car finance, it produced what it knew to be a dishonestly limited notice in 2019. Hasn't taken any enforcement action against any of the lenders involved, even though they know that they all lied their arse off. They knew
just
they
20
were
seconds or so, Paul, just to wrap up. Thank you very much.
But they are investigating 60 law firms who brought claims and are representing victims.
Wow.
No investigation of the lenders who knew they were committing fraud, because it was fraud. They knew these actions were unlawful, these practices were unlawful. I could go on for hours, but I'll leave it there, Andy. But I mean, there needs to be proper training, proper regulation, proper enforcement to protect consumers who are now going to be at the mercy of everyone out there.
I really do support your comments, Paul. I really do. You always inject such a lot of experience and passion into the conversation. I can see John Howard's put his hand up. We're going to go very quickly to John Howard. Then we're going to go quickly to Martin White. John, to you. Oh, you're on mute, sir. Mr. Howard, you're on mute.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I lost signal part of the way through, so that's why I
Oh,
did that. I just wanted to say actually that I wanted to thank Rachel and Lindsay for all the work they're doing. All power to their elbow. Lindsay was a fantastic member of the consumer panel, and I'm really pleased to see her carrying on in the same vein. And let's hope for lots of success from what they do. And all power, as I say, to their elbow, and good luck to them. There are a couple of things I just wanted to go back to.
sure.
I always felt that the idea of treating customers fairly was perfectly adequate, and that where the regulator failed was that they did not enforce it.
Yeah.
And they're still not enforcing it. They try to tinker with rules because that's easy to do. It's not so easy to enforce. And someone at some point has got to say, all right, you've got all the rules you need, now enforce them, because then we would see some justice, I think, in the financial services marketplace. That'll do it.
100%. I mean, that's the whole problem with financial crime, corruption, all these things is the lack of enforcement, lack of funding for law enforcement, lack of funding for or kind of like almost this resistance by the Financial Conduct Authority to grow eh, to a scale that is commensurate with the size of the market that it's regulating. So I think, I mean, 100%, there should be way more enforcement. Um, this lack of transparency with all these Section 166s and, kind of, fix it up behind the scenes. Like, I don't think that does anybody any good. Like, you should know, if your bank is banking criminals because they all are. I mean, anyway, I think maybe that's my concluding comment there,
Thank
Linz.
you.
You
Thank
know.
you. We're
The
going to go
grand old
to,
controversy.
absolutely. We're going to jump to Martin White. Martin, you've got a couple of minutes to share the thoughts you put a note about into the chat ages ago. Go for it, Martin. Thank you very
No,
much.
thanks, Andy. But before I do that, I'm actually curious to know whether Ian, who's new to this group, might have any pithy comments. Of course, he can always say no, but I know he has all sorts of knowledge. You could look at what I put in the chat. You could look at that later, guys. But I really wanted to say, it's all very well, but we have to work out what we're going to do. How are we going to make an impact? Now, I think that Rachel Reeves is potentially exposed if consumer bodies say, Rachel, this isn't going to work. We wouldn't recommend people to do your sort of going for growth investment because, frankly, there's virtually no one you can trust out there. And I think something rather punchy could be worked on. We've got masses of expertise to add footnotes and caveats and things. But I think the thing is, consumer bodies are saying, don't trust the system. Is the UK investable given the poor protection that's now coming in? So that's my thought.
Thank you. We're
I think
going to be
trust
doing a
is
bit of
really
work.
important, and I
Forgive
don't
me,
think
Rachel, after
anything.
you. After you, Rachel. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say really quickly, trust is really important. Martin is 100% right. If people don't trust their bank, they don't entrust their investment advisor, they don't entrust the product, they're not going to invest. You
Absolutely. We're fully.
something that we haven't been able to fix.
Yeah.
We're going to be doing a chunk of work beginning of next year about building some consensus about where our energies and focus should be for 2026. I'll be running a session. It will be called TTS Plans and Priorities for 2026. And in those conversations, Martin, we'll be able to evaluate, the opportunity cost decisions about where we put our very limited resource.
I think
But I'm with you on that.
I think it's almost too urgent, too important to wait for, let's call it, a transparency task force major process.
We'll see. We'll see. I'm going to put
So,
in the chat. So,
Andy, if
Go
I
on.
may, I wanted to mention something this evening, and I think in terms of energy and focus, it's probably
Yeah.
relevant because I think Ofcom needs to have a rocket put underneath it about the Online Safety Act.
Yeah,
And yes, it's doing, like, no one can criticize it for the work it's doing around harm being caused to children, but that is not the only harm that's in the bill. The other harm, as you know, is fraud. One of the other harms is fraud, and illegal content, is fraud in this instance. And I think it was Reuters. Sorry, I've just been away for 2 weeks on holiday, but I'm pretty sure when I was away, I saw something that Reuters had access to documents to show how much Meta was making from basically fraudsters being on their platforms and so this was money being paid to Meta by, which is Facebook, Instagram, etc., from having the fraudsters have their services offered on their platforms.
10%.
I actually just wrote, I was given research about TikTok, and I had to I was viewing these videos that are on TikTok under the financial freedom hashtag. And I mean, like, how the FCA, and they sent me back kind of a really pathetic, I'm just going to, pathetic response, because I sent them the evidence that had been given to me about, and these are people touting like pensions, obvious scams, not just crypto, but, so like, pension money, as we've discussed, the British Steel, etc., like that, you're so vulnerable, at that point with your pension pot. If it goes, it's not coming back, and, this should just be, taken down. That's on the FCA side. But obviously, Ofcom is the regulator here. The Act actually has really, really strong powers. You could, in theory, jail somebody at one of these one of these social media platforms. You can certainly fine them. I think it's 10% of global revenues, and it's been a year now, and we've not, and Ofcom has been reviewing the social media platforms plans for identifying and removing illegal content when it's flagged to them, or how they find it. And the reason I get so annoyed about this is, like, why it's dragging its feet, it's Charles Randall, when he was chair of the FCA, rightly flagged this, rightly called out all of the social media platforms, and it's taken years to get to the stage where there is actually a tool that can hold them to account and get this stuff off. And it's not going fast enough. It's just not being. And I wonder, and I've written this about how much, whether it's, we've seen the US, we've seen Trump threaten, various other US, the Europe, in ways when other US entities are, and obviously all the big tech firms are US companies, and but this is, it's not just UK citizens that are having fraud perpetrated on them via these platforms. This is happening in America as well. So it's a global issue that these firms are actually pariahs, allowing people to prey on their citizens and rob them blind. And I remember when the online safety bill was going through, there was a joint committee that in the Houses of Parliament that did a review of it, and there were some really, really smart people on there who obviously had computer science background. And the hearing had representatives from the social media companies there, and they were, I can't remember exactly what was said, but I remember somebody saying to them, "But no, your algorithm, if somebody, if your algorithm, if you click on a fraud, then you will get served up more and more frauds, because that's the way the algorithm works." And I remember back in the days on the consumer panel, we had a colleague, John, I had a colleague called Tony Hetherington, who was a Mail on Sunday journalist and did an awful lot of work, helping people get their money back and exposing scams and everything. But he used to talk about suckers lists for boiler rooms, and what he meant there was, once you'd been done by one boiler room, your name and your number was passed around, so you were targeted by other boiler room investment scams. But what's happened now is the algorithms are just doing that. You don't need to be on a suckers list. The algorithm, is what's churning that, and that's funny. So I just wanted to, like, if it's my final thought for the evening, it's just, if you're talking about targeting energies, you could do, in my opinion, you could do a lot worse than ask what Ofcom is doing with the social media firms, because if the stuff is not out there, fewer people will come across it, and that's one way to reduce fraud.
Thank you very much indeed, Lindsay and Rachel. Ladies, we'll come back to you for your very, very final thoughts in a moment or two, but I want to just check in with anybody else. Is anybody else here tonight who's itching to say something and can say it in less than 20, 30, 40 seconds or so? Please do come in if you'd like to do that. I'm just going to go on gallery view so I can see everybody. Otherwise, you might be waving a hand at me, but I can't see. No, I think we're good. I think we're good. In which case, why don't we go first to Rachel for Rachel's very, very, very final words, and then to Lindsay for her very, very, very final words. And then guess what? We'll wrap up the session after I've said cheerio. Rachel, to you. Thank you.
Well, I'm just going to say thank you for everybody to dialing in tonight and inviting Lindsay and me to speak with you. It's been a real pleasure. We're always happy to share what we've been working on with people. So this has been a super opportunity for us, and we hope that everybody has I think my thing is, have a peaceful and restful holiday season.
Yeah.
Stay away from scammers, and but best wishes, and we'll see you in the new year.
That's so sweet, Rachel. Thank you very much. Thank you. Lindsay, your final words.
All I would add to what Rachel said is, thank you for your support, Andy. It does mean a lot to us, and there are people on the call who obviously know Rachel and myself through the years, and as we always listen. We're a very small team, but we always listen. So don't feel afraid to reach out to us if you want to.
Thank you very much indeed, ladies. I'm going to wrap up with comment about two other ladies. The first is Adele Ferguson. Adele Ferguson, like yourselves, Lindsay and Rachel, is a fantastic journalist. She's the journalist, the Australian journalist, who did some amazing work helping to expose all kinds of shenanigans down under. And her exposure of the shenanigans down under, and frankly, the awful, awful, awful regulatory framework, is what led to the Hayne Commission, the Royal Commission into Financial and Banking Misconduct in Australia. We're big fans of Adele Ferguson, as we are with yourself, Rachel and Lindsay. And we've had dialogue with Adele Ferguson. And I think of you two when I think of Adele, because there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that if we want to make the world a better place, it does require three things. When I talk about these three things, I sometimes make reference to what we learned in Cubs or Scouts or Guides or Beavers or whatever. We learned about the fire triangle. You can't have fire without fuel, oxygen, and ignition. You have to have those three things. In our world of campaigning, you have to have these three things. You have to have a really strong argument. You absolutely have to have support in Parliament. Perhaps that's why there's an all-party parliamentary group that we're rather close to. And the third thing that you absolutely have to have is well-informed journalists who are not afraid to speak truth to power, ask the awkward questions and that kind of thing. And Lindsay and Rachel, in all sincerity, we think of you in that way as we think of Adele Ferguson, and she worked wonders down under. And no doubt you guys will continue to do so in this part of the planet as well, in the Northern Hemisphere. The second person I'm going to refer to is somebody I've always thought of very highly, Margaret Mead, the wonderful thought leader from many, many years ago. She's the person who came up with the phrase, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. But let's not underestimate our own capacity, people, to actually make change happen through us being a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens. And actually, the very, very final person I'm going to refer to, I'm going to share my screen. One of our members, Robert Delmer, who's part of the advisory group, mentioned this Reith lecture to me a couple of days ago. I urge you to listen to the BBC Reith Lectures of 2025. It's a two-parter. There's a bit called Moral Revolution and another bit called Days of Monsters. I won't spend time going into it now. What I will do is say, please, please, please take time to, forgive me, please take time to actually listen to these. I think you'll get a lot out of them. And I thought of the author of that lot, Rutger Bregman, because he makes a point of emphasizing the wisdom of Margaret Mead's quote, which I'm going to finish on. This is the final piece of our final event of the year, and we're ending it with a quote from Margaret Mead. Never doubt, never, ever, ever doubt, never, ever, 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 ever doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Lindsay, Rachel, thank you very much indeed. We salute your work. Have a lovely Christmas break, folks, if we don't see you before. I don't know how many events we've done this year. We've done lots of them. It's lovely to end on a high. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Lindsay. Good night all.